Mr. Rent-A-Kill was a name that terrified everyone in Sydney's underground. Christopher Dale Flannery was a professional hitman who was hired to kill with cold precision. He was more than just a criminal. He was untouchable by the early 1980s due to his reputation for efficiency, ferocity, and treachery until he disappeared in 1985. Who was the man who gave the moniker? How did he overcome a difficult upbringing to become the most feared enforcer in Australia? And was it betrayal, retaliation, or something more sinister that actually occurred the day he vanished? Click subscribe, turn on the bell, and join us as we explore one of Australia's darkest mysteries if you want to learn the whole story of Mr. Rent-A-Kill. Christopher Dale Flannery was born in 1949 in Brunswick, a working-class suburb of Melbourne, Victoria. His parents were Edward William Flannery and Noelle Mary Flannery. He grew up with a younger brother, Edward, known to most as Eddie, and a sister named Erin. Flannery's home life was unstable. His father was described as a chronic alcoholic who could be violent, and the strain eventually caused the family to fall apart. After his father left, Flannery's mother moved the children into her own mother's home. The result was a crowded, multi-generational household struggling to get by, something that was common in Brunswick at the time. From a young age, Flannery seemed to crave attention. That need may have been intensified by the chaos at home and the broader atmosphere of post-war Melbourne's industrial suburbs, where opportunities were limited and tensions often ran high. Flannery's trouble with the law began early. As a child, he showed clear signs of delinquent behaviour and was eventually sent to the Morning Star Boys' home in Mount Eliza. The institution was meant to rehabilitate troubled youth, but this experience fueled his aggression rather than curbing it. His first known criminal conviction came in 1962, when he was just 14 years old. Public records offer little detail about the offence, but it marked the beginning of a long and escalating criminal record. By the age of 17, Flannery's behaviour had grown significantly more violent. In 1965, he was convicted of a series of serious crimes, including housebreaking, car theft, assaulting police officers, illegal possession of firearms, and rape. For these offences, Flannery received a 7-year prison sentence and was sent to Pentridge Prison in Melbourne. He was surrounded by seasoned criminals while incarcerated, which is said to have encouraged him to continue engaging in antisocial activity rather than to change. These early convictions set the foundation for what followed. After an armed robbery at the David Jones menswear store in Perth, Western Australia, in 1974, Christopher Dale Flannery's journey into Sydney's criminal underworld began. Together with 2 accomplices, he completed the job. The 3 of them hurried east to Sydney following the theft, but their escape was short-lived. Detective Roger Rogerson of the New South Wales Police took them into custody shortly after. Later sources claim that Flannery paid Rogerson to ensure the case was unsuccessful. Police did nothing as a result, and Flannery was eventually released and found not guilty of the robbery. After serving time in Victorian prisons for earlier crimes, including rape, Flannery relocated permanently to Sydney in the mid to late 1970s. By then, violence was already second nature to him. He quickly embedded himself in the city's underworld, taking part in armed hold-ups and enforcement work. Through this, he formed connections with corrupt police officers and high-level crime figures, including syndicate boss George Freeman. Flannery worked for Freeman as a bodyguard, a role that suited his reputation and temperament. In the early 1980s, Flannery worked closely with George Freeman as a bodyguard and enforcer. He was reportedly paid around $300 a week, with the money funneled to his wife under the label of housekeeping for Freeman's properties in Coogee. In reality, Flannery's job was to provide muscle and intimidate rivals. Flannery also maintained ties with Detective Roger Rogerson. Their relationship dated back to the 1974 David Jones robbery, when Flannery allegedly bribed Rogerson, leading to his acquittal. Years later, in June 1984, Flannery was accused of shooting Detective Michael Drury. The shooting was allegedly carried out at Rogerson's request and financed by drug importer Alan Williams. The motive was to stop Drury from testifying in a major heroin importation case. Flannery was charged, but acquitted in 1987. The case became another flashpoint in ongoing allegations of deep police corruption. Despite this, Rogerson continued to keep tabs on Flannery, including surveilling his apartment on Strickland Avenue in 1985. By 1985, Flannery's increasingly volatile behaviour brought him into open conflict with fellow enforcer Tom Domican. Their feud escalated into drive-by shootings and face-to-face confrontations, forming part of the wider Gangland wars tearing through Sydney at the time. By the late 1970s, Christopher Dale Flannery was already a known gunman in Sydney's underworld. By the early 1980s, he was one of its most feared. The period was marked by violent struggles over heroin routes, protection rackets, and illegal gambling. Flannery worked as a hired enforcer and bodyguard, moving between criminal groups and frequently aligning himself with figures linked to George Freeman's organisation. In 1982, police alleged Flannery murdered Terence Basham, a man connected to drug trafficking, and Susan Smith in Murwillumbah, New South Wales. Investigators believe the killings were retaliation over unpaid syndicate debts tied to heroin distribution and standover operations. No conviction followed, but police continued to name Flannery as the shooter, citing Underworld intelligence and ballistic evidence. By 1984, Flannery was drawn deeper into high-level criminal violence as tensions rose around police corruption and drug enforcement. On June 6, Detective Michael Drury was shot multiple times through the front door of his Chatswood home. He survived. Authorities allege the attack was ordered to silence Drury over what he knew about corruption within the heroin squad. Flannery was charged, but later acquitted. That same year, Flannery stood trial for the murder of brothel owner Ray Lizard Loxley. The killing was tied to poker machine disputes and long-standing personal feuds within Sydney's Vice network. Once again, Flannery walked free. In March 1984, Robert Jack Richardson vanished. He was last seen on March 4th in the company of Flannery and associate Kevin Weary Williams. Richardson was never found and is presumed murdered. No charges were laid. Violence escalated in 1985 during a brutal war over poker machine rackets. Acting for George Freeman, Flannery went after rivals following the removal of poker machines from an ethnic club on January 15th. On April 3rd, Flannery carried out a drive-by shooting in Sydney, opening fire on Victor Camilleri and Kevin Theobald after mistakenly identifying them as a rival crime boss. Just weeks later, on April 23rd, Flannery shot and killed his own associate Tony Spaghetti Eustace in North Arncliffe. Police believed the killing was fueled by paranoia rather than orders or loyalty, marking a shift from contract violence to internal purges. NSW Police later estimated Flannery was involved in at least 10 gang-related killings. Most never reached a courtroom conclusion, undone by intimidation, missing witnesses, thin evidence, and a pattern of acquittals. New South Wales police suspected Flannery of carrying out at least 10 contract killings, mainly during the violent underworld conflicts of the early 1980s. These suspicions were based on witness statements, criminal intelligence, and multiple court cases where Flannery was charged but ultimately acquitted. Despite never being convicted of murder, his reputation as a hired killer only grew. One of the earliest cases linked to Flannery was the disappearance of Roger Wilson on February 1st, 1980, near Narnagoon in Victoria. Wilson was reportedly stopped by a vehicle displaying fake police markings before vanishing without a trace. Police alleged Flannery played a role in Wilson's abduction and presumed murder, though he was later acquitted in court. Ray Lizard Loxley's shooting death in Sydney was another case tied to Flannery. He again faced trial and again walked free. Police also attributed the killing of Tony Spaghetti Eustace to Flannery, relying on underworld sources rather than direct evidence. Flannery's preferred method was the use of firearms, often at close range, targeting victims in cars or at their homes. This pattern was evident in the attempted murder of Detective Mick Drury on June 6, 1984, when Drury was shot multiple times through his front door in Chatswood but survived. While Flannery was charged, the case ultimately exposed police corruption rather than resulting in a conviction. Abductions were another tactic. The disappearance of Robert Jack Richardson on March 4, 1984, following a meeting with Flannery in St Kilda, Victoria, fit this pattern. Richardson vanished without a trace, leaving no body and no witnesses. These methods reflected a deliberate hitman-for-hire approach, designed to be efficient, intimidating, and difficult to prosecute. By the late 1970s, Christopher Dale Flannery had reinvented himself. What began as petty crime and armed robbery evolved into something far darker: paid killing. Around this time, Flannery started using the nickname Mr. Rent-A-Kill, presenting himself as a hitman for hire, someone who could be paid to remove a problem, no questions asked. The name wasn't subtle. It framed murder as a service, something you could simply rent if you had the money. According to police intelligence and Underworld sources, Flannery charged anywhere from $10,000 to $50,000 per job, depending on how dangerous the target was. Personal connections didn't matter. The money did. The nickname quickly spread through Sydney's criminal circles and eventually into police files, especially as gang violence escalated during the heroin wars involving figures tied to the Mr. Asia syndicate and other enforcers. Flannery's reputation grew alongside the name. He was said to have carried out at least a dozen contract killings, earning a reputation for efficiency and emotional detachment. That image, cold, reliable, and willing, became part of his brand. Police records from the early 1980s show investigators actively trying to identify and track down the man known as Mr. Rent-A-Kill, proving that the alias had moved beyond rumour and into official concern. Flannery operated as a freelance contract killer, offering his services to crime figures caught up in Sydney's gang wars and Melbourne's criminal rivalries during the late 1970s and early 1980s. Deals were made directly. Payments were usually in cash, and the targets varied: rivals, informants, and sometimes even former associates. Both police and criminal insiders described Flannery as someone who would kill anyone for the right price. One officer famously claimed Flannery was capable of killing his own mother if the payment was high enough. That reputation made him useful, but also dangerous to deal with. The alleged fees tied to his crimes paint a picture of a strictly transactional mindset. For the 1980 murder of Victorian barrister Roger Wilson, Flannery was reportedly quoted $15,000, but was allegedly paid $35,000 once the job was done. In another case, drug dealer Alan Williams and corrupt detective Roger Rogerson were each said to have paid Flannery $50,000 for the attempted murder of Detective Michael Drury on June 6, 1984. These payments marked Flannery's transition from working as a nightclub bouncer and bodyguard to carrying out professional hits. He was known to use .38 revolvers, wear disguises, and sometimes pose as a police officer to get close to his targets. His client list, according to police and associates, included some of the most powerful crime figures in Sydney and Melbourne. Flannery had worked as a bodyguard for George Freeman before moving into contract killing, and he was linked through Underworld networks to Lenny McPherson. Alan Williams allegedly ordered the hit on Detective Drury to remove a threat to his drug operations. Other killings attributed to Flannery include the 1979 murder of King's Cross brothel owner Raymond Lizard Loxley and the 1984 killing of Robert Jack Richardson, both tied to escalating gang conflicts. While clients valued Flannery's access to weapons and his methods of disposing bodies, sometimes through burial, they also feared him. Heavy drug use made him unpredictable, and that volatility reportedly led to growing resentment and backlash from within the criminal world itself. Flannery's criminal record began early. In 1956, at just 14 years old, he received his first conviction, though the exact charge was never publicly documented. As a teenager, he built a long list of convictions that included rape, firearms offences, assaulting police, car theft, and burglary. These crimes led to multiple prison sentences in Melbourne. After his release, he found work as a bouncer, but it didn't last. In 1974, Flannery was arrested in Sydney for the armed robbery of a David Jones menswear store in Perth. The case ended in acquittal, surrounded by allegations of police corruption involving Detective Roger Rogerson. Despite his growing reputation as a hired killer, Flannery would never be convicted of murder. On February 1st, 1980, he was charged with the shooting death of barrister Roger Anthony Wilson, killed near Narnagoon, Victoria. Flannery stood trial alongside associate Kevin John Williams. After a 14-day Supreme Court trial in 1981, both men were acquitted. During the proceedings, a key witness, Deborah Boundy, disappeared and was later presumed murdered. As Flannery walked out of court, he was immediately rearrested, this time for the 1979 murder of Raymond "Lizard" Loxley, who had been shot multiple times in a King's Cross alleyway. Prosecutors offered Flannery a manslaughter deal, but he refused. 2 separate trials followed, both ending in acquittals in 1984. Later that same year, Flannery was charged in connection with the attempted murder of undercover detective Michael Drury, who was shot outside his Chatswood home in what police believed was a corruption-linked hit. Flannery and others, including Rogerson, were implicated, but once again, no murder convictions followed, either from that case or from later investigations into his alleged killings. Christopher Dale Flannery's first long stretch behind bars came early. In 1965, at just 17 years old, he was sentenced to 7 years. He was sent to Melbourne's Pentridge Prison, a place notorious even by the standards of the time. Flannery spent time in Pentridge's H Division, where discipline was enforced through routine physical punishment by guards and constant violence between inmates. The atmosphere was brutal and unforgiving, and it hardened many of the men held there. While inside, Flannery mixed with other violent offenders, including Ray Mooney, who was serving a 12-year sentence for rape and assault. These relationships would later feed into the criminal networks Flannery became part of. After his release, Flannery was repeatedly pulled back into custody. In the mid-1970s, he was imprisoned again in Melbourne following another rape conviction. This came after his 1974 acquittal for the armed robbery of a David Jones store in Perth. By this stage, his explosive temper was well established, especially given earlier incidents involving police assault. While public records don't document many cases of Flannery starting fights inside prison, the aggressive culture of Australia's maximum security facilities suited his volatility. Just months before his disappearance, Flannery was charged in Sydney with demanding money with menaces from a bookmaker in February 1985. He was granted bail and released, avoiding another period of remand custody as tensions around him continued to rise. On the afternoon of May 9th, 1985, Christopher Dale Flannery was last seen leaving the Connaught, a 30-storey apartment building at 10 Liverpool Street in Sydney's central business district overlooking Hyde Park. He and his partner had moved into the apartment in April, signing a 3-month lease under a false name. The relocation was deliberate. By that point, threats from Sydney's Underworld wars were intensifying, and Flannery knew he was a marked man. His name was tied to escalating conflicts involving figures such as Lenny McPherson and George Freeman. That day, Flannery was reportedly heading to a meeting with George Freeman, a powerful illegal bookmaker and a central figure in Sydney's criminal landscape. He planned to take a taxi from near the apartment, possibly travelling through King's Cross. Some accounts place him outside the Palace Hotel, attempting to hail a cab. What's certain is that no confirmed witnesses ever saw him arrive at the meeting, and his car was later found still parked at the Connaught. One unverified claim came from convicted criminal Arthur "Neddy" Smith, a longtime associate whose reliability has often been questioned. Smith alleged that while Flannery waited for a taxi, he accepted a ride from 2 Sydney detectives he recognised. There is no official record to support this, and the claim emerged from sources deeply entangled in the corruption scandals of the era. It remains one of many conflicting accounts shaped by the blurred lines between the police and the underworld at the time. After that afternoon, Flannery vanished completely, leaving behind no body, no personal items, and no contact of any kind. Later that same evening, Kathleen Flannery reported her husband missing to New South Wales police. She told officers she believed he had been murdered and directly named George Freeman as responsible. Police contacted Freeman soon after, but he refused to allow them onto his property. Several days later, officers returned with a search warrant and conducted a detailed search of Freeman's premises. Nothing was found, no physical evidence, no remains, and nothing linking him directly to Flannery's disappearance. Investigators retraced Flannery's last known movements from his Sydney apartment, but no confirmed sightings or leads emerged. From the beginning, police treated the case as a suspected homicide. Given Flannery's reputation and his involvement in violent underworld feuds, investigators believed he was unlikely to have disappeared voluntarily. Despite this, no arrests were made and no definitive evidence surfaced. Kathleen Flannery publicly insisted that corrupt police were involved, echoing long-standing allegations that law enforcement ties to Sydney's criminal figures had weakened the investigation and helped bury the truth behind Christopher Dale Flannery's disappearance. Did Christopher Dale Flannery vanish, or was he silenced forever? Sydney's most feared hitman left behind a trail of violence, betrayal, and unanswered questions. From gang wars to shocking murders, his story still confounds police and haunts the underworld. If this story gripped you, subscribe now and hit the bell so you don't miss our next true crime deep dive. And tell us in the comments, what do you think happened to Mr. Rent-A-Kill? Let's hear your theories.